everybody, Dave Furry here. Welcome to part 4 of building a sugarcane railroad. In this episode, I'm going to talk a little about making foliage, tropical foliage that is, and how to mock up buildings. And we're going to mock up a bunch of buildings that you'd see on a sugarcane plantation. So let's get started. In order to make models of sugarcane plants, it's probably a good idea that we should look at the prototype and see how the plant is constructed. From a distance, it looks like tall grass, but as you get closer to it, you can actually see the cane structure in the individual stalks. And you'll notice at the base there are brown leaves, and I noticed that as I started to build my model, I didn't have enough brown in the model, and I'm going to go back and touch that up. In the last episode, I gave a very brief discussion about how I was going to make sugarcane for this project. And I'm going to cover it here in a little more detail because the whole concept of making weeds this way, using rope and other fibers, is interesting to me and may be interesting to you. The rope I'm using is called sisal rope, and it's available in hardware stores and at Home Depot. Well, after looking at photographs, I determined that the height of the sugarcane plants should be, in HO scale, about 6 to 8, perhaps even 10 feet high. So what I've done, I've cut the sisal rope into pieces, and then I'm pulling the strands apart to separate the fibers. The fibers are very stiff, and they're easy to work with, so they're easy to pull apart. After I separate them, I'm laying them beside this piece of soft iron wire. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to lay these fibers onto the wire, and then I'm going to twist it like I was making a pine tree. To hold the fibers in place, I'm using Beacon's 3-in-1 adhesive. I really like to use this adhesive because it has some tack to it. It dries clear and it dries fairly flexible. And it's available at Scenic Express and in most Ace hardware stores. So now I'm taking a palette knife and picking up the fibers that I've separated, and you notice I've separated them so I know I have enough to cover the wire. And I'm going to lay them into the glue using the palette knife. You could use a spatula from the kitchen for this. And I'm laying them in, and I have to spread them out. I had them the length of the wire, and they've got compacted a little bit, but that's okay. What I'm going to do, I'm going to pick out a few more strands and just lay them in place on the glue. Once I have all the strands in place, then I'll put the top wire on and I'll add the Micromark twisting tool. Once I've attached the tool, I'm going to give the two wires a couple of twists just so that all the fibers will stay in place. Now I'm taking the little vise and that's on the end of the wire and putting it in a larger vise just to hold it while I twist them. And to twist the wire, all you do is pull on the handle of the tool, and it acts like an old-fashioned drill. It just spins the wires around, and you can see me doing it here. You can also see underneath some of the other fibers that I've tried, and also at the back of the workbench there's fibers there also. I've tried all kinds of stuff to get the look that I want for the sugarcane. It's very hard to duplicate the sugarcane foliage. So now the next step is to remove the wires from the vices, and with my fingers I'm going to push all of the fibers to one side of the wire. So what I'm doing, I'm just taking all of the fibers and bending them upward. And initially they don't want to stay upward. They want to go back into the shape they were, but we're going to fix that in the next step. I was thinking of using an iron and ironing the fibers upward. But then I tried a heat gun and I had some weights. So what I did, I heated up the fibers and got them so they were almost to the smoking point, and then put a weight on them to hold them in place and allow them to cool. And it worked. It ironed them, so to speak, so that they hold their shape and they stay in an upright position. So I left the sugarcane under the weights for about 15 or 20 minutes, And you can tell just by feeling it because the fiber is cooled off now and it's ready for the next step, which is trimming it. And I got these old carpet shears and I'm trimming off all of the fibers that look like they're out of place, the ones especially that are coming out of the bottom of the wire. And the ones on top I want to trim so that they look kind of uniform, but I also want to make them look a little bit ragged too. So I'm trimming them down so they're all the same height, and then I'm going to take the scissors and go back and kind of chop at the middle of them a little bit just to give them a little ragged appearance. So all the stuff on the workbench I'm saving. Now I'm at the spray booth and I'm spraying the whole sugarcane branch or frond or whatever you want to call it. I'm spraying it with a Design Master green, which is called basil. I'm doing both sides. And then the last step is to take some yellow and just run it over the very, very top of the frond, just to make the color at the top look like the top is dyed back. I've only ever been in a sugarcane field once, and that was on St. Kitts many years ago, and I was impressed by the evenness of the rows of the sugarcane plants. They looked like they were laid out with geometric precision. So what I'm doing here, I'm putting down row upon row of white glue and then putting the frond that I've created into the glue. And in some places you have to bend them so they'll sit flat in the glue, and in several places I added little weights on the ends to actually hold the frond in place. I've decided to make this field look like half of it has been cut already. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put in this last frond, add a couple of weights to the end of it to hold it flat. This one didn't want to sit real flat in there. And then in front of this last row, I'm going to add a lot of debris on the ground to look like the slash that's left over when they cut the cane. And you can see here how nice this fiber looks painted up. Here's an old postcard showing the debris on the ground in front of the areas where the cane is being cut. I wanted to duplicate this, but I didn't know quite what to do. So here's the approach I took. I soaked the ground area in front of the cane plants with dilute matte medium. Then I took the Nock Grassmaster, and using a green and brown static grass, I proceeded to cover the area with a fine layer of grass. The next step, while the matte medium was still wet, was to take some Nock Wildgrass, and this is the same fiber that I'm using in the Grassmaster. I'm going to take some with my fingers and sprinkle it along the base of the sugarcane plants to look like dead growth. I'm going to have to paint the base a little bit to get the color I want, but this is a start, sprinkling the wildgrass into the area, into the wet matte medium in front of the sugarcane plants. Then I wanted to add the look of some cane plants actually laying on the ground. So I took some Woodland Scenics, green field grass, took it in my fingers, spread it out, and then with my carpet shears I snipped it so that the pieces fell in kind of a random manner into the wet matte medium. After everything is in place, I'm going to give it all another spray with the matte medium so that we have glue on top and glue on the bottom to hold everything in place. The last step is to get all of the pieces that are sticking up straight to lay flat on the ground to look like they've been trampled. Getting the color of the cane correct was a real challenge for me. You'll notice in the photo that the bottom of the cane is a light and dark brown color, and some of the tops of the cane show where they've dyed back a little. To try and duplicate these colors, I started with some craft store acrylic paints. Here's one of the kinds I use. These are very cheap. They're available in craft stores. They're about 59 cents for a little container. I started with this light brown color, and I'm just dabbing it onto the base of the plants. And what I'm doing, I'm just using the side of my brush to add the color to the tops of the static grass and the tops of the textures that I've already glued in place. I put the static grass in so that it would look like stubble on the ground, stubble of the plants where they'd been cut. But by taking the paint and pushing it onto the tops of this stubble, I'm knocking a lot of it over, and I really don't care about that because this stuff would have been walked on and trampled down by the ox carts and the workers in the fields. After I applied the light brown color, I decided that the color needed to be darker, so I selected a little darker brown, and I'm brushing it in here to the base of the cane plants and putting it more or less everywhere that I already put the light brown color. Now these colors are still wet, so they're kind of blending together on the surface of the field. Well, that's okay. And what I did, I took a pad of paper towels and used it like a blotter and went in and kind of blotted up the excess paint, which tended to blend them together a little bit further. The last step was to go in and apply some of this darker brown color to the tops of the plants. And you can see here all I'm doing is gently dragging the brush over the tops of the plants just to leave a little bit of paint right on the very tips. Now that I've kind of figured out what I want to do with the sugarcane and how to make some plants that look somewhat like sugarcane fields, I'm on the hunt for other kinds of model vegetation that I can use to simulate tropical foliage. What I'm really looking for are plants that make a good background to the sugarcane fields. Plants that look tropical, that are easy to find, easy to build, and look good on the railroad. I started by asking my friend Hal at AtlanticScaleModelers.com if he could laser cut me some leaves that looked like they came from one of the large tropical plants. Here's a sample he sent. These were laser cut just on green craft paper, and they look pretty good. My next adventure was to go to the craft store and look at the dried flowers and the plastic flower reproductions that they had in stock. Most of what they had was a little too big for HO scale, but I did manage to salvage this one plant. I plan on painting it and then snipping off the individual leaf bundles. In the workshop I found some bags of this Heki deco grass. I'm going to use it to add some color to our little jungle that we're building. Still looking around the workshop, I found a bag of sumac tips that a friend had sent me from California. So I took these, separated the leaves from them, and painted the tops a forest green color. These will be dipped in dilute matte medium and then rolled in scenic foam to look like little trees. I also found several packages of these Alchem scaled models, HO tobacco plants and corn plants. And I'm going to paint these up and assemble them, and I'll show you how I do it. Continuing my quest and looking through all the junk I have stored away here, I found some Jordan Miniatures palm trees. These were offered in the 1970s at one point, and I don't know if they still make them or they're still around. These are injection molded plastic, and they make a nice little tree. I also found several ready-built palm trees. This one is made out of feathers, and these three in the foreground are made out of some kind of hard paper. Over the years, I've accumulated a large assortment of the Scenic Express products. This is their buffalo grass, and it's sold under the Mini Nature label. It's tufts of grass that are on a plastic backing, and it makes for an easy application of grass tufts. Again, it's just another texture that can be added to the background behind the sugarcane, or to give the tropical foliage a very lush look. I also found some green coated paper and cut these little weeds out of them. When I had the weeds all cut out, I took some Elmer's school glue and put the weeds in it to make a little base for them. Mini Nature also makes this vine and foliage material. I'm going to use a lot of this both in the trees and as a ground cover. I'm also going to use this Silflor goldenrod weed, the green knock leaf material, and of course trees. I have a whole assortment of trees, and I'm going to pick and choose and probably use most of them I won't use the fall trees that I've built. Whenever the water surface dries, I add another layer of acrylic gloss gel to it. I make sure each one dries completely in between. Here I'm adding another layer, and I'm using a product from Scenic Express called their acrylic water gel. I like this. It's as good as anything offered on the market, and it dries fairly rapidly, overnight usually, and it gives the water a nice hard finish when it's dry. My aim here is to build up perhaps 8 or 10 individual layers of acrylic, one over the other, and I want each one to dry completely in between. And what I'm doing here, I'm taking a dry China bristle brush and I'm just texturing the surface. Here I'm moving on to the other side of the bridge, and I'm doing exactly the same thing. I'm going to add the acrylic water gel, and then I'm going to texture it with the China bristle brush, and then I'm going to go away and allow it to dry. And if you're in doubt about it drying completely while you're building other scenery, or if you're concerned about getting scenic materials into the wet acrylic water gel, then what I do is put a sheet of saran wrap or clear plastic over the water until you're through with building the other scenery, and then remove it at night so it can dry. Here I'm adding yet another layer of gloss water gel, and this time I'm trying to get it up under the bridge. I want it to look like the water is coming out from under the bridge and flowing down the stream. So now I come to the structures, and the most important structure on any sugarcane operation is the centrale. The centrale is the building where all the cane goes to get processed into sugar. Some of these were privately owned and others were cooperatives. And in the cooperatives, the centrale was just that. It was central to many sugar plantations, and all of the sugarcane was transported into the centrale to be processed. Cane season usually lasted from October until January. That's when the cane was ready to harvest. And as soon as the cane was cut, they would rush it to the grinding mill or the centrale to have it processed because they didn't want the cane itself to lose any of the valuable sugar sap. The mills usually ran about 24 hours a day. The mills crushed the cane and reduced it to a thick, dark syrup. The fibrous residue that was left over was called bagasse. So what I intend to do in HO scale is to model the outside of the mill. Model what you can see. I'm going to leave the inside detail for later. Here's a mock-up of the centrale I'm going to build on our little railroad. What it is, it's made out of shirt cardboard, just glued together with white glue, and it's just a mock-up so I can get an idea of how I'm best going to fill the space with a building that looks prototypical and yet is going to be easy for me to build. And here's a close-up of it here. You can see I've just used basic shapes to fill the space. It will be used as a template to build the final structure. I had windows, cut strip windows, industrial style windows that'll go along the clerestory across the front, and I'll show you how I'm going to build it in another episode, but I really wanted to show you the mock-up first because the mock-up's very important. It allows me to plan the space around it once I know the bulk and the length and width of the building. There's also the workers' houses, and I'm going to build 2 or 3 different types that I've seen in DVDs and in magazine articles so that I can try building both stucco and wood structures. One of the other things I did, I took some small cardboard squares and I set them on the scenery, and this is going to mark the location of where several workers' buildings will go, several small houses. I took the bases to the workbench, and working from photographs, I made 3 distinctly different types of structures that you'd find on a sugarcane plantation. I made a duplex workers' home, a mercantile building that'll be all stucco, and then the third structure is a small peasant's house, and it'll have a thatched roof. The hip roof I'm holding in my hand I'm going to make that thatched, and I haven't figured out how I'm going to do that yet, but I'll probably use little bundles of the sisal rope to finish off the roof. Now that I've marked up the little structures, I have to take them to the workbench and actually build them. But in the interim here, I'm finishing off my little sumac tip trees. The sumac plant is a mountain laurel, I believe. And being a mountain laurel, it grows in places that are hot and dry, like in the desert of southwestern California and places like that. That's where I've only found these. And what I've done here, I've taken them, as I showed you before, I've removed the little leaves that are on them. I've sprayed the foliage a dark green color. And now what I'm doing, I'm dipping them in dilute matte medium, a 3-to-1 mixture, and I shake off any excess matte medium that's on them. And then I'm rolling them in a mixture of scenic foam. This is a foam blend. And I think I explained before what a blend was. It's just bits and pieces of all the foam that's laying around the workshop. And what I do, I put it all in a bag. Now, I could put it in that box and roll the foam around in it, but I've tried to reduce the mess by keeping the foam in the bag. While building this project, I decided I needed some weeds that were a little different than the buffalo grass weeds. So I tried making my own using a nylon scrubbing pad, and it worked pretty well. So I'm going to show you how I did it. What I did, I took Elmer's school glue. I like the school glue because it dries absolutely clear. It's transparent when it dries. So what I did, I put some drops of school glue on a piece of a plastic bag and ripped off some of this nylon scouring pad material. It's really tough stuff, and you really have to pull and tug at it to get it to come off so that it looks like grass growing in kind of a random tuft. I put the tufts in the school glue, and one of the big ones here kept falling over, so I put a little weight behind it to hold it in place till the glue dries. Once the glue is dry, you pop it off the plastic, and the weeds have its own little stand, and it allows it to sit flat on the scenery wherever you put it. I'm going to finish up this row, and then I'm going to go away and allow the glue to dry, and once the glue is dry, I'm going to take the weeds to the paint booth to give them a nice green color. I'm going to use 2 shades of green and a shade of yellow. Here are a couple I made yesterday, and you can see how nice they look. They're two-tone with green on the bottom and a little yellow on top. Now it's time to start some of the background scenery. And in the background, I'm going to put these really cheap plastic palm trees that I've painted, and I'm going to put them in the middle of the scene, and that means in the middle of this little railroad. So what I'm doing here with an awl, I'm punching a hole in the styrofoam, putting a drop of yellow carpenter's glue in it, and then adding my palm trees. Any tree, no matter where it's placed, looks better in a cluster of 3 trees, and that's what I'm doing here with the palm trees. I'm putting them in 3 tree clusters, and it fills space nicely. It gives a canopy effect, and it really looks good to the eye. And around the base there's a little bit of excess yellow glue, and all I did here, I took some knock leaf material and I just pushed it into the glue. When I'm done, I'm going to go back and squirt everything with dilute matte medium again, just to make sure all the loose ends are in place. Here I'm planting some of the scrubbing pad weeds that I made, and you can see they're on this nice little base. All you got to do is put down a little glue and push them in place, and they look like $1,000,000. Now I'm going to put them here and there, any place I think I need tall grass, or any place I want to cover up something. I still have a few more palm trees in the box, So I'm going to continue along and keep planting them. And I'm going to be planting them, as I said before, in the middle of the scene, in the middle of this railroad, because the trees in the foreground will be taller and the trees in the background will be shorter. It's just a way of forcing perspective in a scene. So I'm adding the rest of them here. This is behind some of the structures, and when the structures are finished, when I've actually built them, I'll add a garden behind them, maybe a hedge fence around the building, and try to make it look like it's lived in. If you've read my scenery book, you know that my theory is texture over texture. I like to have lots of texture in a scene, and that's what I'm doing here. The palm trees are just one element. I'll be adding grass and weeds and flowers and a multitude of other textures, and I'll be piling them on top of each other, as you can see here. Here we have some Woodland Scenics field grass. We have some knock bushes with flowers on them. We have some Scenic Express clump foam. And in the background we have the sugarcane plants that I made. And here I'm adding, just to add more confusion to the scene, I'm adding some of the leaf netting that Scenic Express sells. So I'm continuing to add things to this scene, and what I want to do, I want to go away now and allow all the glue to dry. Here I'm just adding some weeds, some of the weeds that are like sugarcane plants, although I didn't paint them as well, and I'm adding them here just in front of the rocks. Just into the wet matte medium I'm going to add some super turf. I'm going to spray it again with matte medium so that everything's really wet, and then I'm going to add some knock leaf foliage, and some of it'll stick to the grass that's sticking up there, so it'll look pretty good. So that's about it for this episode. Stay tuned. I'm going to take the summer now and complete these little structures and get everything ready so that when I come back in the fall, I'll have some nice buildings to show you. I'll have some more of the scenery done. And if you're following along, you may want to try your hand at building some scenery yourself. So I'll see you next time. This is Dave Frary. See you later.